Hello everyone, wishing you all a wonderful day. Today, we're going to discover how one small gift, one quiet lesson, and one unexpected burden slowly bring Jack and Tien closer together in ways neither of them saw coming. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next videos. Morning light slipped through the trees along the roadside, scattering gold across Jack's face as he stood by a tiny stall with a soft pink helmet in his hands. He turned it over carefully, then asked the vendor in a quiet voice, "Is this one for women? It's really beautiful." There was a shy hesitation in the way he said it, the kind that only came when someone was choosing a gift with real care. He had picked the helmet because the color reminded him of her bike. "It matches my girlfriend's bicycle," he explained, and a faint smile touched his lips as he pictured Tien wearing it. Not far away, Tien was slowly pedaling her three-wheel bike with the extra training wheels still attached. She moved in small circles, cautious and tense, sweat shining on her forehead under the growing warmth of the morning. Under her breath, she murmured to herself, "It feels easier today than yesterday, but I'm still scared of the main road." That fear stayed in every breath she took. There was no rice left at home, the cakes still hadn't sold, and everything in life would feel a little less heavy if she could finally ride properly on her own. She stopped for a moment, drew in a breath, and looked toward the road ahead, where Jack was waiting. In that quiet moment, Jack's patient anticipation and Tien's lonely determination seemed to meet somewhere in the middle, tied together by something invisible but steady. Sunlight flickered through the trembling leaves above them, like fragile hope trying its best to rise inside ordinary days. Jack walked toward her with the pink helmet in his hand, carrying it like a promise. Tien wiped the sweat from her brow and began pedaling again. Every turn of the wheel felt like one small step over her fear. They hadn't said much yet, but both of them could already feel the other's presence. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words to be understood. That morning, with birds singing in the trees and distant traffic humming beyond the village road, they started the day carrying their own private worries, but somehow sharing the same quiet wish that life might slowly become gentler. When Jack finally reached her, he held out the new helmet and said in a low, warm voice, "Tien, wear this. It'll keep you safe in traffic." She looked up at him, surprised, and her eyes brightened instantly. She took the helmet with both hands and carefully placed it on her head. Her fingers trembled just a little as she fastened the strap beneath her chin, and in that moment, it felt as if she were being wrapped in his concern. Then Jack handed her a bottle of water. "Drink some. You forgot to bring any this morning." His smile was soft, but behind it was clear worry. He had seen how drenched in sweat she was, how hard she had been pushing herself. Tien drank from the bottle, the cool water easing the dryness in her throat, and for a second, she didn't know what to say. The simple kindness of it touched her more deeply than she expected. Jack climbed onto his bike and looked back at her. "Come on, follow me, Tien." She nodded and started pedaling behind him. Her heart was pounding, not only from the fear of falling, but also from the unfamiliar comfort of trusting someone so completely. Jack rode ahead at just the right pace, never too fast, never too far, always leaving enough space for her to keep going without panic. As they moved along the quiet village road, he kept guiding her in a calm voice. "Look straight ahead. Don't look down. Pedal steadily. Tien bit her lip and tightened her grip on the handlebars, trying hard to follow every instruction. At first, her body was stiff with fear. Every wobble made her chest tighten. But Jack never sounded impatient, never once made her feel embarrassed. His patience slowly loosened the knot of panic inside her. A gentle breeze drifted across the road, lifting strands of her hair and carrying the scent of fresh earth from the fields. Jack turned his head to glance back, and there was unmistakable pride in his eyes. "You're doing really well," he called. Something softened in her chest when she heard that. In that moment, Tien realized he wasn't only teaching her how to ride, he was teaching her how to believe she could do something she had been afraid of for so long. With him nearby, the burdens she carried every day felt a little lighter. The wheels kept rolling, steady and rhythmic, almost like the sound of two heartbeats beginning to move in step with one another. In the early sunlight, their shadows stretched long across the path, side by side, as if even the road itself could see the bond quietly deepening between them. Jack slowed a little and waited for her to come closer. That small act alone made her feel safe. Her fear was still there, but it was no longer something she had to carry alone. For that stretch of road, the whole world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, moving forward carefully, one pedal at a time, beneath a sky so still it felt as though it were watching in silent approval. As the sun climbed higher, the village path seemed wider and brighter, streaked with shimmering light across the red dirt road. Jack eased his bike into a turn and said, his tone as steady as ever, "Tien, turn around now, slowly. Keep your eyes ahead." She swallowed, clenched her teeth, and copied his movement. Her three-wheeler wobbled for a second, and her fingers tightened hard around the handlebars, but then the bike steadied. Jack smiled. "That's it. You're almost proficient now. The hardest part is just getting on and off." His words washed over her like cool water. Some of the panic that had been rising inside her faded away. Encouraged, she pedaled a little harder to keep up with him, and the rhythm of the wheels blended with the sound of her quick breathing. Jack glanced back once more, the look in his eyes quiet but full of pride, like a teacher seeing a student finally stand firm after many tries. Then he teased her gently. "When you get really good, we'll race each other, okay?" A smile spread across Tien's face, her first real smile of the morning. It came naturally this time, light and unguarded. In that instant, the fear of falling, the pressure of money, the heaviness of everyday life all seemed to loosen their grip on her. A breeze slipped by, carrying the faint fragrance of crepe myrtle blossoms, as if the morning itself were whispering something hopeful. They circled again and again, Jack always slightly ahead, but never far enough for her to feel abandoned. He stayed close in the way that mattered. Their shadows stretched across the road, sometimes separate, sometimes overlapping, as silent proof of the companionship growing between them. Deep down, Tien understood that this was about more than learning to ride. It was about learning how to lean on someone, how to let trust carry part of the fear. It was about discovering that courage came more easily when you didn't have to find it alone. At the end of another lap, she finally stopped. Her breathing was heavy, and her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were shining now. Jack looked at her and gave a small nod. He didn't need to say anything else. That simple gesture was enough for both of them to know they had crossed a small, invisible line together. The morning seemed to hold them gently in that moment, as if the world had paused just long enough to witness their quiet victory. After the practice, Jack led Tien to a small po shop by the roadside. Steam billowed from the large pot of broth near the entrance, filling the air with the rich scent of chicken, scallions, and star anise. It was the kind of smell that made hunger arrive all at once, warm and undeniable. Jack stepped inside first and called out, "2 bowls of chicken pho, uncle." They sat facing each other at a simple table. The bowls were set down in front of them, and the heat rising from the soup quickly fogged Jack's glasses. He took them off, wiped them carefully, then looked at Tien with a gentle smile. "Eat while it's hot. It tastes best like this." Tien lowered her head and took a cautious sip of broth. The warmth spread through her body instantly, and her eyes lit up. "It's really delicious, sir." Jack watched her with quiet satisfaction. "After practicing all morning, you already look healthier." She nodded, feeling the exhaustion in her body slowly melt into something lighter. The food seemed to wake her up again from the inside, replacing her weariness with a small but steady sense of energy. For a little while, they talked softly about the rest of the day ahead. Jack would go to the company. Tien would head out later to harvest pumpkins and sell them at the market. Then Jack said, in the same calm tone he used whenever he wanted to reassure her, "Leave the training wheels on for now. When you want them removed, tell me." The words were simple, but to Tien, they carried a quiet promise. He wasn't rushing her. He wasn't pushing her to become brave all at once. He was telling her that he would be there at every stage, waiting until she was ready. When the meal was over, Jack paid before she could even reach for anything. "Let me take care of it." Tien looked at him in silence. It wasn't just breakfast. It was the tenderness inside the gesture that moved her. For one morning, he had spared her the effort of cooking, the worry of arranging food, the small daily pressure that had become such a constant part of her life. Above them, the steam from the bowls curled into the air as if carrying the warmth between them upward. Outside, the sun had risen higher, but inside the little faux shop, time seemed slower and softer. They finished eating without hurry, each spoonful settling into them like comfort. And when they stepped back out onto the road, Tien felt lighter somehow, as if the weight she had carried since dawn had eased without her noticing. Jack glanced at her once as they walked out, and there was hope in his eyes. The quiet hope that days like this, simple and peaceful, might keep coming. The 2 bicycles rolled slowly down a narrow alley on the way home, avoiding the noise and danger of the main road. Jack pedaled ahead, then turned his head every so often to check on her. "This way is calmer," he said. "Don't be afraid." Tien nodded. Sweat still clung to her forehead, but now a real smile remained on her face, lingering from the warm bowl of pho and the confidence he had helped her find. When they reached home, they parked the bikes beneath the shade of a tree and stepped into the yard. Jack opened the door, went inside, and came back with water. "Drink this. You must be tired." They sat side by side in the yard, saying little at first. Above them, a flock of birds chattered noisily among the blooming crepe myrtle branches, and the leaves rustled in the breeze. It was one of those rare pauses in life that felt almost sacred because of how brief and fragile it was. After a while, Tien spoke again about her plans. "This afternoon, I'll harvest pumpkins in Jongkan and sell them at the market." Jack nodded, but there was hidden concern beneath the gentleness of his tone. "Be careful. If anything happens, call me." The stillness around them seemed to wrap itself more tightly for a few seconds, as if neither of them wanted the moment to end. But then Jack's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It was Luan. He answered, and as he listened, something in his expression changed. His voice grew deeper, more serious. His eyes drifted away from the yard and towards some distant place only he could see. When the call ended, he sat in silence for a moment before turning back to Tien. "Go change your clothes," he told her. "I have to meet a friend." She nodded without asking questions. She could sense the shift in him immediately, the way a shadow had quietly entered his eyes, the way the ease of the morning was slipping away. Jack stood up and walked toward the door, his tall frame now carrying a weight he had not been carrying before. Tien watched him leave, and a small ache tightened inside her chest. The peace of the morning had been so delicate, and now it was gone, giving way once more to whatever difficult reality waited outside. A breeze crossed the yard, stirring the scent of crepe myrtle blossoms, but it could not clear the heaviness gathering inside Jack. They parted with soft words and ordinary caution, but both of them understood the same thing without speaking it aloud. The rest of the day would not be as simple as the morning had been. Jack drove to the place Luan had mentioned, where the sun beat hard against a stretch of dry, empty land. A planning map had already been erected there, standing stiff and official against the harsh light. Luan was waiting for him. When Jack arrived, Luan spoke quietly. "This is the land your mother and Miss Thu invested in. It's now part of the industrial zone plan." Jack took the documents and started reading. As his eyes moved down the page, his expression darkened. The lines were cold and unforgiving. The money tied up in the land could no longer be withdrawn. Liquidation was impossible. Compensation, if it came, would be small. He said nothing. Regret rose inside him, like something sharp and burning. His mother had mortgaged the house. She had put up company papers. She had even used the savings he himself had accumulated, all to support her son and build a better future. And now that sacrifice had become a trap. Luan tried to comfort him. "Don't be too upset. You're still young, and your mother is healthy. Losing money is the easiest kind of loss." But Jack couldn't bring himself to smile. He thought immediately of his mother, the woman who always put him first, who worried over him even when she had burdens of her own. He imagined her learning the truth and felt something twist painfully inside him. Right there, in the hot silence of that empty place, a decision formed in him. He would not let her know yet. He would handle it himself. Somehow, he would solve it and reclaim what had been risked. Luan offered to lend him money, but Jack shook his head. "Thank you. I'll manage." The wind rose across the dry ground, lifting dust into the air in restless swirls. Their shadows stretched long beside them, dark and thin on the earth, mirroring the invisible burden that had settled across Jack's shoulders. He looked out toward the distance, toward the future factories that would one day stand where dreams had once been placed. The pain inside him was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was slow, deep, and steady, like a wound that cut inward instead of outward. He gripped the papers tightly in his hand. In that moment, something in him shifted. He was no longer only the son being protected. He was becoming the one who would have to protect. Luan rested a hand on his shoulder. "You're strong." Jack nodded once, but inside, only one thought remained clear. He would do whatever it took to make sure his mother never had to carry this worry. The sunlight softened slightly as the afternoon wore on, but the darkness in his heart did not. At the market that afternoon, everything around Tien moved in the opposite direction. Alive, noisy, bright with ordinary life. She arranged her pumpkins neatly on the stall and called out to passing customers in an energetic voice, "Fresh young pumpkins here, 10,000 a kilo." An elderly woman selling nearby smiled at her, helped her weigh the pumpkins, and even lent her a scale. The two of them chatted warmly about vegetables, bicycles, and the rhythm of market life. One by one, Tien sold all the pumpkins she had brought. Relief washed over her as the money pouch in her hand grew heavier. At one point, she smiled shyly and confided to the older woman, "I'm just learning to ride a bike. Soon, I'll pedal to the market like you do." The old woman laughed kindly. "Keep practicing and you'll get used to it." Tien gathered a few bunches of greens to take home and stir-fry for Jack later. Even the pumpkin peels, she thought, could be saved and used as fertilizer. Her joy was simple and practical, the kind rooted in work, usefulness, and small victories honestly earned. At almost the same time, Jack stood at Luan's construction site, looking at a very different picture of life. The house rising there was large and modern, with broad glass panels catching the light and a spacious workshop taking shape inside. Luan guided him from floor to floor, speaking with excitement about the future. "Once it's finished, I'll get married," Luan said, grinning. "There'll be enough room for a whole soccer team of kids." Jack smiled and congratulated him, but his eyes stayed distant. His mind was still fixed on the land, the documents, the money his mother had sacrificed, the responsibility now pressing down on him. Around him was the image of success, progress, and plans moving forward. Inside him was the opposite, a private weight he refused to show. And so the day unfolded in two quiet, parallel lines. On one side was Tien, standing in the lively market with dust on her shoes and pride in her heart, happy that she had sold everything with her own hands, hopeful that soon she would ride her bike there on her own. On the other side was Jack, standing in the middle of his friend's rising success, silent beneath the burden of protecting his mother from the truth. The contrast between them was sharp. One life glowed with simple, everyday hope. The other was darkened by responsibility and hidden fear. As evening drew near, Tien made her way home, carrying fresh greens, looking up now and then at the late afternoon sky. She silently promised herself that she would become stronger. Jack left the construction site and drove back, with his own resolve hardening in silence. He would hide his sorrow. He would find a way through. The evening breeze moved across the land, carrying the scent of earth and flowers. It seemed to whisper the same reminder to both of them. No matter how heavy life became, they still had each other. And the story settled there, in that tension between fragile hope and quiet regret, between simple joy and unspoken sacrifice. Yet above everything else, one thing remained steady, the bond growing silently between them, waiting for the day it would be strong enough to carry them both through whatever came next.